Okay, Namaskar, everybody. I'm A.K. Ghosh. Just a brief introduction. I have industry background. I did my graduation and post-graduation in engineering from BHU, long time back. And then I was with Steel Authority for 27 years, heading their environment division at SAIL. And then I left SAIL and joined a private group, Jubilant Life Sciences. I was there for another about 13 years as their chief of EHS and president CSR. By that time, the EIA scheme was developed in QCI by some of us, and it needed full attention. So I took retirement, and then I joined QCI as their principal advisor in fully developing the scheme as well as implementing. I took final retirement in 2017 end, and now I'm heading their accreditation committee for this scheme, NABET accreditation committee. So it's quite a big topic, and to do justice in about an hour is very difficult. So what I will try to say is that, give you an overall picture and a sense of what exactly is required to develop an EIA report. And for details, of course, you need further inputs. I think CSC's workshop will cater to that. Right, so let's start. Yeah. So the topics we are going to cover are what is an EIA that you should understand, and what are the various types of projects for which EIA are required in our country, and what are the environmental aspects of those. Then once again, explain why EIA is a multidisciplinary study and a teamwork. This is the crux of the, preparing an EIA. And roles of these experts involved in preparing an EIA, the coordinator and the subject area experts. Then how do we collect the baseline data, what all data to be collected, what precautions are to be taken in this, because a proper baseline status is a very crucial factor for an EIA. Then interpretation of the data that has been generated, what exactly is the status of environment in that area. So that interpretation and that analysis should be done before we try and identify the impacts and evaluate them and quantify the impacts wherever possible. And finally, we'll briefly touch on what should be the contents of an EIA report as per the India government notification. So what is an EIA? Primarily, it's a process of evaluating the likely environmental impacts of a proposed project or developmental work, taking into account the interrelated biological, socio-economic, and cultural human health impacts, both beneficial and adverse. Now, when we say project, it's not only the project per se, but related activities also. For example, if it's a mining project or industrial project, there'll be a lot of transportation involved of raw materials or, finished goods. So those are also to be actually taken into consideration. Now, EIAs are always project and site specific. A power plant EIA will be very different from, say, hydel project EIA. And same power plant EIA for different sites will have different connotations. Then it must cover the physical, biological, and social aspects of environment. There's the surrounding part. Now, Government of India has defined, about 39 sectors of projects which can be broadly grouped in this five groups. Mining and extraction of mineral resources, including oil and gas, power generation, manufacturing industry, various types of manufacturing industries, the infrastructure projects, highways, ports, airports, effluent and waste management, pipelines, and finally, construction industry and townships. So these will broadly cover the various developmental projects that come up in our country. Now we'll go one by one, group wise. What are the environmental? When I say environment, that means physical, ecological, and social, all three. Mining and extraction of mineral resources and mineral beneficiation. So, like depletion of mineral resources, obviously, if you take out some, so resources getting depleted. So that's one of the aspects. It will cause a change in land use. That means, all the land in our country are designated, either for industrial use or for, residential use or for agriculture, or this is forest land, this is wasteland. So if you develop a mine somewhere at a greenfield site where the mine did not exist, so temporarily till the time that mine operates, there will be a change in land use. Similarly, if you build up a factory in an area which is not industrial use, the land use will be first changed and then the factory will be allowed to be built. So these are the aspects: vibration, noise issues for various types of project. Supposing a mining project is there will be for mining projects, these are two important aspects, vibration, because these are required for mining process. Then it will change the hydrology and surface water quality of that area. The reclamation of mined out land and overburden is an important factor. Then slime disposal and tailings management, especially from washery and mineral beneficiation projects. Then disposal of produced water and oily sludge from oil and gas industry. Impact of biodiversity in the area, very major way for mining, because in our country, most of the mineral resources are situated in the best quality forest areas. And then socioeconomic impacts, including R&R, if it involves land acquisition and people are to be relocated. And air and water pollution, of course, that will be involved, and impacts on increased traffic. So these are some of the aspects which are there for this group of industries. Then power generation, thermal, hydro, nuclear. Now the type of aspects will be emissions for particulates from, say, thermal, particulate emissions, SOx, NOx emissions, mercury emissions. So these are some of the emissions which will be there. Transportation of huge quantity of coal, fly ash management, particularly in Indian context, because our coal has very high ash, huge amount of cooling water required. So as far as the hydro power projects are concerned, inundation of biological resources for dams, displacement of people, sedimentation, soil fertility, salinity, soil erosion. So these are some of the major aspects of hydro project. Riverine ecology will be affected. And then ultimately you also have to take into account if the dam breaks, what happens. So dam break analysis has to be carried out. So these are some of the important aspects. On the nuclear side, disposal and reprocessing of the spent fuel, radioactivity, escape of radioactive cooling water, disaster management, decommissioning. So just to give an idea as to what kind of issues are involved. Coming to manufacturing industry, petroleum, steel, cement, chemical, pharma, fertilizer, distilleries, and all grouped together. So air and water pollution, challenges in achieving zero liquid discharge, because most of the projects are now being asked to achieve zero liquid discharge. So leaching from accidental spillages, odor and noise issues, storage and handling of hazardous chemicals, particularly for chemical industry and pharma industry, uh, hazardous waste generation, handling, storage, treatment and disposal, high greenhouse gas emissions, because a lot of fuels are used, uh, volatile organic carbon emissions and control, process and fire safety, risk analysis, including qualitative risk assessment, impact on biological resources, including soil from erosion, accidental discharges, health and cultural aspects of neighboring community, direct and indirect job opportunities. So these are some of the aspects to be considered in developing an EIA for a manufacturing industry. Coming to infrastructure industry like say highways, ports, airports, pipelines, ropeways, common effluent and waste management facilities, change in land use, opening up of new areas including eco-sensitive zones. These are for say highways, displacement of people, yes. Then change in runoff patterns. This is extremely important for highways. Highways are generally raised from the surrounding soil, surrounding land, so it does affect the runoff pattern and drainage. Noise, vibration, and automobile emissions from highway projects. From say ports and harbors, dredging and dumping, then ballast water management, oil and cargo spills, hazards and risks from storage of hazardous chemicals, some of the aspects of big port and harbor project. Then coming to say airports, noise and vibration, it also affects the avifauna, additional traffic, project affected people, R&R issues, hydrology and drainage, because airports, huge land area is required. So hydrology, drainage, very important. We have seen that, Delhi's T3 terminal was inundated at least twice, and the baggage area was full of almost knee-deep water. That happened because, a proper hydrological study of that area was probably not carried out with the maximum rainfall. So everything, it was probably a saucer type place. So all the water came there and that situation arose. So storage handling, this is for common effluent and waste management facilities, storage, handling and treatment of disposal of hazardous wastes. This is increasingly being felt very important. Soil contamination, leachate management, once again, from various types of hazardous waste, spillages and sludge management from CETPs, common effluent treatment plants, and transportation of wastes and effluents. So these are some of the aspects of this kind of infrastructure projects. Coming to township and construction industry, change in land use, hydrology, including stormwater management, treatment, reuse, and disposal of waste water and sewage, municipal waste collection, handling, and treatment disposal, planning for parking and traffic management. It is becoming more and more acute in our towns. Planning for energy efficiency, extremely important, building orientation, construction materials. So this is an area which is now getting a lot of attention. Avoidance of heat island effects, you protect your own building by using all types of, materials and reflectors, but that gives a heat island effect wherever these multi-story buildings, with glass facades coming up, that area, inside you require less energy, but outside it becomes very hot. So that's heat island effect. Air pollution from traffic increases like anything. Preservation and reuse of topsoil. Yes, topsoil is very important. How do we preserve and how do we reuse the topsoil? Rainwater harvesting and groundwater recharging. This is becoming now gradually mandatory everywhere. Fire hazards and firefighting plans. Some of the aspects of these kinds of industries. Now, EIA is a multidisciplinary study, because for EIA you need to know about the sector itself, as well as inputs from various knowledge areas. So fields of expertise required in developing an EIA. First is land use, because as I said, land is a finite quantity, and as the population pressure increases in our country, every inch of land is important. So what kind of final use that land is being put to, that is very important. For these developmental activities, many current land use get changed from, say, agriculture to industry to commercial, whatever. So this becomes a very important aspect of EIA. So the people there should know about the land use rules in the country, how do you change land use. They should know how to develop land use, land cover maps, how to use satellite imagery. So all that knowledge is required. That is the first aspect of EIA. And of all the functional areas that you will come through, maximum inputs, probably the maximum input to an EIA can be given by a very good land use expert. He can carry out so many types of studies. Today, such details are available in our imageries that much of the information about that study area can come from such, information can come from proper use of the satellite imageries that are available today. Air pollution monitoring, prevention and control. This is one area of expertise which is required. So air pollution monitoring, prevention. It's better to prevent than to control. So to the extent possible, we should try to prevent. So the industrial projects which are coming up should adopt such technologies and raw materials which will reduce generation of pollution, and then what is left, that should be controlled. Meteorology, air quality modeling and prediction. These are from point sources like chimney stacks, then line sources like when a traffic moves, or the volume sources where say a coke oven battery. So where the entire battery top or from sides, those fugitive emissions are there. It's a typical example of volume sources. So there are softwares available today for carrying out this modeling studies. So the person handling this aspect should know about the meteorological science, and also the software and how to plot the prediction on the maps showing the various receiving bodies. That means whether it's a water body or a habitation area or an industry, whatever. So the plotting should be done on such maps. So this knowledge is necessary for this person. Coming to water pollution, monitoring, prevention and control, just like air pollution, to the extent possible, try to prevent, and then if not possible, control. And of course the monitoring, that means there are so many parameters to be monitored. So an understanding of sampling, how to preserve the sampling, how to transport the sampling to the lab from site. So all that knowledge is required for by this expert. Ecology and biodiversity, like the land use, this is one functional area which covers a very major part. So it includes terrestrial ecology, aquatic ecology, marine ecology, avian. So all that combined into one, floral, faunal. So we have defined, this has been defined as ecology and biodiversity. Socioeconomic aspect, these are the two, ecology and socioeconomic. These are the two very important aspects of EIA. And in our the EIAs that are prepared in our country, these are the two aspects which are found wanting many a times. The other aspect, the physical environment, air pollution, water pollution, land use, noise and vibration, other things that will come next, are easier to understand and handle, more tangible, But ecology, biodiversity impact on that area and the socioeconomic aspects, how it will be impacted, it's more challenging to understand and evaluate and also quantify. The other areas of knowledge that is required for an EIA preparation are hydrology, both ground and surface, because whatever you do on a land, it is likely to cause changes in the ground hydrology. Groundwater knowledge is required both for how much you can extract and what would happen if you extract too much. Of course, these days permission of the Central Groundwater Board is required, but even then, knowledge is required. And water conservation. Water is going to be the most precious, resource in our lifetime itself. So how do we conserve water? So this knowledge is required. Geology, particularly for big projects like mining, hydro projects, and big power plants, steel plants. So this is an important aspect there. Soil conservation. There are two aspects of this functional area. One is soil chemistry. How is the fertility of the soil getting affected by human activities? Supposing there is a factory coming up, if there are certain emissions which settles on the soil, how will it be affected? So that is soil chemistry is one aspect, and the other is erosion. Supposing a mining project is there or a construction project is there, that soil is getting disturbed. I mean, it is being taken out and all that. How do we conserve that soil? So how do we reduce erosion and how do we conserve the soil? That is the second aspect of soil. So that knowledge is required. Risk assessment and hazard management. So one has to understand what are the hazards involved in that particular project and an assessment of the risk. This is extremely important for bigger projects of industry like a petroleum industry, chemical industry, steel industry, even for big power plants. So use of software is also required. So this is another very important aspect. The on-site emergency plans are prepared by these people for that industry. Waste management, hazardous and solid waste. It includes biomedical waste, which is, as we all know, becoming more and more important these days. Energy management and traffic management. These are the two areas, once again, is getting more and more focused attention. So these are the different functional areas, knowledge which is required. These people will need different type of education and different type of experience as well, so which will come to. Now EIA is a teamwork. Individually sitting in a room, it cannot be done. There has to be interaction with different people amongst themselves to develop one. So what should be the team? The EIA team would comprise people representing different disciplines we have understood earlier. Then it is essential to understand the project activity for which the EIA is to be prepared and the various ways it may affect the environmental, ecological, and social aspects of the surrounding area, as we discussed for the different type of developmental projects. So understanding of supposing you are putting up a chemical plant or a bulk plant. So what are the processes involved? What are the raw materials involved? What kind of reactions taking place? What kind of intermediates or wastes are getting generated? How do you handle them? What kind of emissions are there? What kind of volatile organic carbon emissions are there? How do we monitor and control them? So these are the process knowledge required. Broadly, I'm not saying that he has to be an expert in designing a chemical plant or a reactor or a process like that, but he should understand, say for example, a power plant, what kind of boiler it is, what kind of process is being used by the boiler, so that he actually understands what inputs are required for the EIA. So understanding of the process activity and its fallout on the environment, surrounding environment. Then obviously, if such be the case, there has to be a team leader, which earlier used to be known as team leader, project leader, manager, whatever. So now a term has been used in the accreditation scheme, which is operated by QCI. It goes by the name as EIA coordinator. So everywhere it is being used, this EIA coordinator, which is the central figure. Now the EC must broadly know the processes involved of the subject project and its environmental aspects. Then the team needs to also include various subject specialists, known as functional area experts, as we have seen earlier. And then it is important to understand the roles and functions. This is very important of the ECs and FAs to appreciate the teamwork in developing the EIA. So the following slides will say what should be the roles and functions of these individual person, how they collate everything together to come out with the EIA report. So coming to the coordinator, prior to getting the work order, he should study the tender document carefully, understand the project, and seek clarifications from the project proponent if necessary, so that he knows that this power plant is coming up, this is the capacity, this is the boiler technology, this is the coal, from where coal is coming, what kind of coal is coming. So broad things he should know. If it is there in the tender document, fine. Otherwise, he should find out by from the project proponent before making his offer. Then gathering information of the site conditions from secondary sources. So you should try to find out wherever it is coming up, it's a greenfield project, then about that area, he should try to gather information from the environmental aspect and general setting up, connectivity and other things from secondary sources. With these two knowledge, he should, also he should assess the ways in which the project and the related activities may affect physical, ecological, and social environment around it. So these are the first preliminary understanding he should develop, and then he should form a core team of comprising himself and the key functional area experts. If it is a power project, for example, the air pollution person will be very important. The land use person will be important, ecology, socio-economy. These are the people who will be important, hydrology. So he should form a core team. You need all the functional area experts, but there will be some people who are more important for that type of site and type of project. So that he should do in the beginning. Ideally, this team should visit the site to understand the extent of work involved and then prepare a comprehensive proposal, especially for big, EIAs. This should be done so that you do not miss out on anything and you develop a proper proposal. After getting the work order, it is the coordinator's job, drawing up a time-bound program for developing the EIA, giving important milestones. You have to work to a particular program. Now, it may be in the form of a bar chart, which should give the plan and the compliance bar both. Only the plan bar will not, help you. So there has to be how much, to the time frame you are being able to comply. So the compliance bar will show. But EIA making is a perfect candidate for a PERT network type of monitoring. So program evaluation and review technique, earlier it used to be done manually, now there are softwares available, because there are so many interrelated activities that only a proper PERT network will help the coordinator understand that this is the critical path. So if we get delayed in any of these activities during this path, then my total length of time period will get affected. So it gives a better opportunity to monitor big EIA work. Then he needs to meet the project proponent or the DPR, detailed project report consultant, with key functional areas as he has already identified, for an in-depth understanding of the project during construction, operation, and closure phases. So our notification says, I mean, Indian government notification says that, impacts are to be identified and evaluated for all these three phases. So we normally do for construction operation, but many a time we miss out on the phasing out phase or the closure phases, except for mining projects, which is done, but it is important aspect. Then explaining to the project proponent the methodology that will be followed for developing the EIA and get an agreement on that. And then agreeing on the information and help required from the project proponent various stages and recording that discussions. We find that this was not being done earlier in our country, but gradually this is being done, so that there is an agreed, time schedule, and what is the role of the project proponent and their consultant, particularly technical consultant and the EIA consultant. So that helps in proper coordination with the client. Right. Then it continues after getting, then compiling the form 1A as per the notification, and terms of reference. There is a requirement of preparing a terms of reference, basically, which is the scope of the EIA. Now, all these guidelines are there in the government notification. So along with, in consultation with the project proponent, it is the job of the EIA coordinator to develop this along with his team, with the help of his team, presenting that TOR to the concerned authority, whether it's at the central level or at the state level. I think most of you know that the bigger projects and the projects having higher, probability of environmental impacts are assessed at the central level, and the balance are assessed at the state level. There are detailed methodology given in the EIA notification 2006, how it is to be done. So some of the projects come to the center and some go to the state. So the EIA coordinator along with the PP is involved in presenting the TOR and obtaining the approval of the TOR. That means the scope of the EIA. The next one is very important. This was not being done in our country earlier. Allocating the specific points of TOR. The TOR given is a huge one, it sometimes run into 50, 60 points. So it is a better to allocate each TOR to the different, functional area expert, the team. Maybe, for a particular TOR, 2 or 3 people will be involved. So one of them will coordinate that activity. So if that is done, then the EIA coordinator can have a better control on the time aspects of EIA preparation. Visiting the site with the functional area experts, relevant functional area experts at least, for selecting sampling locations, because baseline data authenticity is extremely important. So proper locations for sampling are to be decided, and then initiate the work and implement the system which ensures quality of baseline data. That means properly samples are being taken, they are properly being preserved, they are being properly transported to the laboratory. So all these aspects will have to be seen, and the EIA coordinator is the person who coordinates this. Coordinate with all the team members to get a holistic picture of the impacts. We will come later in a slide to show that why is it important that all the people sit together and then discuss about the project, about the surrounding environment, to understand his or her area of activity, what kind of impact can be there. Then reviewing and collating the functional area expert reports. So we'll come later that every functional area expert, the geology person or the water person or the air person or the land use person, should prepare his or her own report and then submit it to the EIA coordinator, and then guiding the FAs in developing the mitigation measures. So they have done their own work, but he should guide, that guidance will be required in some cases to the FAs so that mitigation measures can be developed. Finalizing the EIA, obtaining, on the basis of that he collates and then ultimately finalizes the EIA, obtaining comments and clearance of the project proponent on the draft EIA, and making presentations in the public hearing if it is applicable, or the authorities, that is Environmental Appraisal Committee at the center and state level EAC at the states. Now, once again, I presume that many of you know that in our country, many types of projects require a public hearing. That means the local people should know what kind of project is coming there, how they will be affected, and what are their views, what precautions should the project proponent take so that they are not, that means, affected negatively. So that is called public hearing, a public consultation actually. So that there also a presentation is made. So that also normally done jointly by the project proponent and the EIA consultant. So these are the activities of, in brief, the activities of the EIA coordinator. Now coming to the experts, that is functional area experts, prior to and after the work, it is together. Broadly understand the project, especially with respect to her functional area. If she is a ecology expert, she should know what is the requirement from this aspect is concerned. So from her aspect, she should try to understand. Visiting the site with EC for familiarization, as mentioned in that earlier one. If she is the one which is included in the core team, she might have to visit the site prior to work order, work order, that means while preparing the quotation. Now, after getting the work order, participate in the discussions with the project proponent and DPR agency, along with the coordinator, for an in-depth understanding of her area of activity. He or she should get, points clarified from the project proponent and DPR consultant. They will be the best to clarify those points. Interacting with EC and other FAs to get a holistic picture of the project. Once again, we'll come to a slide where we'll explain. And related activities and approach to be followed to address her areas. So this is what she has to understand in that. Visiting site to help the EC in selecting the sampling locations. Then comes his main responsibility, collecting or supervising collection of baseline data, air, water, soil, noise, everything. This includes, checking that, proper samples are being taken, proper location has been selected. So as I said earlier that, preservation, transportation, everything is included in this. So he is the person or she is the person who is responsible, mainly responsible, quality assurance of primary data collection. Now, the same applies for socio-economy and ecology also. Now, the laboratory, supposing it is an NABL accredited laboratory, so they have their own method of, doing the testing. So that part you can leave it with the, laboratory. But prior to that, the part of collection of samples and, preserving them and properly sending them to the lab is the job which is, accredited consultants area of activity and directly of the functional area expert. The air pollution control expert must ensure this for the air samples, so for soil or water or noise, whatever. Ensuring quality of baseline data through quality assurance protocols, including collection preservation, as we have already discussed. Next, she has to carry out aspect analysis. What are the aspects involved? in this particular project, and then identify the secondary data which are required in her area of activity. So secondary data are to be collected. The sources should be known. From which source? The source should be reliable. It's not the internet that you just go to the internet and download something. So there has to be a proper source. The thing should not be very old. It should not be dated. So reliable sources. An EIA making consulting organization should have their own list of sources from which they will collect, say, socioeconomic data or a land use data, or meteorological data or ecological data. So if they have all that data written, so you go to only such agencies and make sure that the data is current to the extent possible and is from such reliable agencies only. Ideally, an EIA should be based on primary data alone, and secondary data should be used for reference. So this is the ideal situation, that everything should be done on primary data, but sometimes we do depend on secondary data as well. Carrying out ground truthing of secondary data as required. Once you develop the secondary data, you actually go and see the site whether this is actually the case or it is already outdated. Analyzing and interpreting the baseline data. We'll come to interpretation in next slides. Then identifying the potential impacts after discussions with other FAs and quantifying where possible. We'll see it later again in detail. Developing the environment management plan. What are the mitigation to be adopted for the projected or likely impacts? And post-project monitoring plan. These are the requirement after you have completed the projects and put in all the mitigation measures. How do we monitor that those mitigation measures are bringing the desired results? So he will prepare a report and submit it to EC and help EC in the EIA. It will also help that these are the parts which should get into, because EC is actually going through, ideally EC should go through the FA reports of all the FAs, the key FAs, and then he has in his mind how to collate all those. But in that process, the EIA, the subject specialist should help. Then addressing issues raised in the personal hearing of that area, supposing she is from socioeconomy, whatever points have been raised in the public hearing, that she has to address in the EIA, and also ensure that all TOR points allocated to her have been addressed in the report. So in short, these are the type of work that the subject specialists will have to do. Now, briefly, once again, the detailing cannot be done. So briefly, sampling locations, extremely important. So ideally for ambient air, it should be based on a dummy modeling exercise, taking emission standards for point sources, available data for line and volume sources, and meteorological data from the nearest IMD station. This is what CPCB's original guidelines were. That supposing you are putting up a power plant, so that the chimney will be there, this should be the height, because you consider that this is the sulfur content and this is the size of the boiler, and those formulae are available, so you can know what is the height, and you also can get from the standards that supposing it is 50 milligram per normal meter cube emission and normal temperature. So all those inputs to a air quality modeling exercise can be assumed, and the exercise can be carried out. And then the plot will give, what are the worst locations of concentration at the ground level because of emissions. So from that, you can select 4 to 8 covering both downwind and upwind sides. Try to cover habitat areas especially. Follow the NAAQ, National Ambient Air Quality Guidelines, for sampling and parameters to be tested. Detailed guidelines are there. So parameters to be tested should be mentioned in the TOR. if it's the job of the EIA coordinator along with the functional area expert to propose that these are the parameters we will measure. And mind you, a major component of an EIA cost is in this aspect, NAAQ parameters, that benzoalpha pyrene and other things, So those are very costly tests. So the coordinator should, propose that these are the things we'll be doing, and let the authority say yes or no. Well, no, you should do for the entire NAAQ. And that is agreed during the meeting, then you have to do for the entire NAAQ. 12 parameters. Otherwise, you do the basic parameters. Your EIA cost comes down by at least 8 to 10 lakhs. Okay, then surface and groundwater. Surface water cover both upstream and downstream from the project site. Ground slope and hydrology conditions to be considered, which likely way, if there is any slippage from the plant, which way it will flow. That from that side, the baseline data should be collected. Number of stations will be guided by site conditions, but minimum 4 to 6 covering both core and buffer zone should be done. Preferably mixed sampling should be done. That means you collect same quantity of sample at different time and mix. For effluent channels, you should be composite sampling. Composite sampling means you are also taking into consideration the flow. That means depending on the flow, you mix. Supposing you take about 3 samples in a day. So you mix the samples in that proportion. In mixed samples, you mixed it in the same volume. But here, the mixing volume will depend on that particular time's flow, how much flow it is there. So it gives an actual picture of the effluent, the pollutional load that is coming out from the plant. Groundwater, preferably all dug wells in the core zone should be covered, and selected ones in the buffer zone also cover some deep wells, tube wells in that area if available. For both surface water and groundwater parameters as per TOR, you should say that these are the parameters we will do. If not there, then follow the BIS 10,500. Soil, use reference of AAQ modeling and surface slopes to select soil sampling locations. Many of the EIAs, we see that all the sampling, whether noise, soil, air, water, are being taken in practically the same place, which is not correct. Cover cultivated fields and vegetated areas, especially in downwind directions. Parameters mentioned, pH, EC, nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, organic carbon, P2O5, nitrates, soluble cations, moisture, bulk density. I have mentioned these because these are not normally mentioned in any, standards as far as I recollect. So these can be followed. These are good enough. For noise, plant boundary must, and then habitat areas, including residential, sensitive, commercial, industrial, traffic. So you can follow these, and both instantaneous noise and LEQ should be measured. Coming to interpretation of the data collected. So this will be first with physical environment data, that is air, water, noise, etc. So compare with the national standards and best practices if available, finding the gaps with respect to such standards. Supposing a standard is say X and you are finding X plus something, what is the gap? Analyzing the significance of such gap by suitable methods of analysis like a 98th percentile, and classifying the gap as significant or insignificant or critical or whatever. So this is the gap analysis. Once you do this and then further analyze whether these gaps with respect to the potential impacts from the project, to conclude if the project will contribute significantly to the baseline status, mostly adversely. I mean, I don't know how it will be done favorably, in order to address the mitigation plans. So this is the type of interpretation of a data should be done. The other is, supposing we generally know what is the proportion of, PM10 and PM2.5 found in the AAQ. Supposing we find this is mismatching, the PM2.5 is much higher than normal, supposing 70%, 60% of PM10 is PM2.5, then we try to understand why it is. I mean, is there any reason behind it? Is there any, then we find probably a cement plant is there, grinding unit is there, from there it is, coming out, or some highway has crossed from there, because of traffic movement and other things that is being contributed. So try and understand what are the things. So these analysis should be done in the EIA, and try and see whether the project and related activity will accentuate it. This is what, in short, all the interpretation that to be done. For ecological data, you try and understand the natural resources on which the local habitat depends, the sustenance of the local habitat, general discussion on that. Presence of reed species, rare, endangered, endemic, and threat. Now, from references could be IUCN, could be, Zoological Society of India, or Botanical Society of India, or, some such reliable sources. So this you can get vetted by the wildlife agencies in that area. To what extent they are supported by reliable secondary data. So that also should be studied. Their conservation plans should be discussed under the mitigation measures if something is required, in situ or ex situ conservation. Stresses on habitat, what kind of stresses are expected from the project and related activities, and probable factors causing the same, and probable impacts on the ecological environment of the project and related activities. So this discussion should be there in an EIA report, so that you understand that the current baseline condition has been understood, and also how the project or its activity, related activities, affect that. That has also been addressed. So this is what is to be done for interpretation of ecology area. For social area, demographic profile, low or high life expectancy, literary level, skewed male-female ratio, etc., and the probable reasons for the same. So demographic profile, when you have, our EIAs are full of, pages after pages of data, but you should analyze that data and try and interpret, if there is a skewed male-female ratio, what is the reason? Is it the reason that too many migrant workers have come and they have not brought their families, they are living alone, so male numbers have gone up, so that will have certain socio-economic impact. So these are the things that analysis should be done. Health status, maternity mortality rate, infant mortality rate, and how they compare with the national average. If it is high or low, what are the reasons? Specific health problems or illness, health infrastructure, what is the quality of the same, or whether it is adequate. These discussions should be there in the interpretation itself. Economic status, to some extent these are covered in our EIAs. I found that source of income, earning members in the family, per capita, per family income, employment type of employment available locally, skill sets of the locals. It's not exactly addressed always, but very important. Skill sets of the locals suiting direct or indirect employment from the proposed project. Unfortunately, in our country, local peoples do not get much employment in the industry. The reason is probably the skill set is not available. As industries are becoming more and more automated and all that, the high level of skill is required for operating them. So that skill may not be available. So what is happening is, the local people are getting normally all the bad things, pollution, higher traffic and other things, but they're not getting fully benefited in direct employment. But there can be indirect employments, like, there will be requirement of, say, part-time workers, loading, unloading, welding, gas cutting, so many other, ancillary industries may come up. So an assessment of skills required That should be done so that the EIA should, discuss what kind of indirect employment potentials are there. Social and cultural, local social and cultural life and probable impacts from the influx of the outsiders caused by the project, the crime, reasons. And I just read a very interesting article in Indian Express just about 3-4 days back. This Atal tunnel after the Rohtang Pass has been opened now, which connects up the Lahul Spiti Valley with Manali region, giving 12 months connectivity to that area. So that has been recently opened, and already the impacts are being seen both positive and negative. The positive impacts are that downstream, that is beyond the tunnel on the Lahul Spiti side, the tourists are going, there are more eateries coming up, more, hotels are coming up. So, the income activity has gone up there. But on the downside, their people never used to even lock their doors, now there are already, thefts taking place, robberies taking place. So this negative impact is already coming. People are also leaving their, what we normally do, the so-called, urbanites, leave the plastic packages, other things. So pristine environment of that area is getting affected. So both negative and positive impact is already happening within these few months of opening of the Atal tunnel. So it's a very nice article given in the time in the Indian Express newspaper. Why EIA is a teamwork, interdependence of functional areas. Now, just a very broad and very preliminary way we're trying to show that why it is required to be a teamwork. So consider a bulk drug plant coming up in a greenfield area, a new area where there was no factory earlier. So for the socio-economic expert, how she will know what kind of impact will be there because of activities from that plant. So there will be emissions which might affect human health. So who would help her understand that? The air pollution expert and air quality expert. The air pollution expert will tell her that, these are the type of, emissions which will go. And then with the help of the, occupational health, unfortunately, that I forgot to mention, with the help of a person who is knowledgeable in the health aspect, he or she will be able to know that how it will affect the human health in the nearby areas, wherever the villages, etc. are there. So AQ person will help that these are the areas where the pollution is expected to settle. So unless and until these people are together along with the EC, it will not happen to the extent what is desired. Similarly, emissions settling on the cultivated land. Who will guide her? That, once again, APAQ and the soil conservation person. Now, if it's settling on the cultivated land, how is AC affected? Because, he's supposing his yield of his crops go down. Then what happens? His income comes down, that, villagers. So all these things can come out through a churning, through a discussion, sitting in the team, not once, but several times this exercise has to be done. Now, emission settling in the nearby forest area, who will guide her? Once again, the EB person is required. There are examples of, sulfur dioxide emissions coming out on oxides of nitrogen emissions coming out from the power plants, big power plants, settling down with the, first rains and impacting mango crop. It happened with the in near Farakka, So the power plant was made to put up a desulfurization plant and take actions to reduce NOx emission. There are various methods by you can reduce NOx emissions. So this will also be possible if this kind of expertise sit together. Accidental discharges polluting the water body and soil, who will be required to take, part in the water pollution expert, hydrology expert, soil conservation expert. Improper storage, handling and disposal of hazardous waste, what kind of impact can be there. So once again, the solid waste expert, hazardous waste expert is necessary there. Odor issues is a major issue for many of the irritant basically for the local people. So AP and WP person can help her. So what I'm trying to say that in a very simplified kind of a picture, that why it is important for everybody sitting together to be coordinated by the EIA coordinator who knows about the project and what are the possibilities of various things, and they discuss amongst themselves and then take down these are the areas I have to actually track and understand. So this is a very simplified example, but just to explain why it is required. Now coming to the last part of my this thing, contents of the EIA report. This is as per the notification. There is a structure of EIA report given in our country as per the 2006 EIA notification by the Minister of Environment and Forest. There are 12 chapters to be covered. So these are the chapters. One by one we'll go. In the introduction, what is the purpose of the report? Detail of project proponent and the name of the project. Location, we should give minimum these: plot, village, tehsil, district, latitude, longitude, survey of India map, nearest landmark, airport, highway, railway station, etc. Map showing project boundaries. So these are the basic minimum should be there. Brief description and nature and size of the project, what capacity and all that, and what the category A, category B, item number of the schedule. Government schedule gives various items for the 39 sector that should be mentioned. Ecological sensitivity of the project, nearness to wildlife sanctuaries, national park, wetlands, critically polluted areas, tourist areas, pilgrims areas, defense areas, etc. This should be briefly mentioned. Importance of the project for the region, for the country. Brief history of the project, earlier environmental clearances, if it is a case of expansion, or whether wildlife clearance is required. Mine plan approval was there if it is once again expansion of a mining project, ground and surface water approval, etc. These are there or not, and the scope of the study, which has been agreed. That is the terms of reference. This should give the first chapter introduction. The second chapter is project description, the project per se. So should mention product, byproduct, project configuration. That means whether it's a new project, modernization or an expansion. Land, whether additional land is required. If so, what is the extent of land, status of procurement, size and capacity and magnitude of operations, including associated activities. So this must be described. What raw materials, fuels are required, what are their sources, what should be the mode of transportation, their handling, storage, what linkages have been already established. This should be discussed in this chapter. Water and power requirements in all phases, that is, construction, operation and phasing out. Conveyance permissions, this should be there in that chapter. Technology and process description, including the project layout, process flow diagrams, broad material and water balance. This is the crux of this chapter, so that the reader understands this is the project, this is the process being followed, this is the logical sequence, PFD, process flow diagram. This is broadly the material balance. So how much is being input, what is the output, and what are the emissions and waste, etc. And then water balance. So this must be a part of this chapter. Mitigation measures to meet environmental standards. Supposing you're putting up a power plant, you have to put up a ESP or a backfilter. That should be a part of this. Proposed schedule of approvals, including forestry, wildlife, and implementation of the same, how this will be done. Manpower requirement, permanent, temporary, outsourcing in all phases. This should be discussed. What is the project cost? Once again, details should come. To the extent available, information from the DPR or the feasibility report should be taken by the EIA consultant to include in this chapter. So there is a lot of things that the project proponent need to give to the EIA consultant. This should be agreed right in the beginning and signed off, so that they are not held up unnecessarily. Next is chapter 3, description of environment. The study area has to be described in a way with photographs and all that, so that the reader can get an idea of that site without going there. So it should also discuss the scope of baseline studies, including components and methodology adopted. Baseline study to address physical, ecological, and social environment should be included. Description of the pre-project scenario based on the site studies. That means, what is the current scenario before the project comes up. Summary of the baseline data and baseline map of all environmental components. So this should be describing the environment with photographs wherever applicable. Then anticipated environmental impacts and mitigation measures. This is the 4th chapter. Details of investigated design, project configuration, construction, regular operation, and final decommissioning or rehabilitation of a completed project. So this should be discussed. Impacts should address all components of receiving environment. Once again, physical, ecological, and social. Should bring about both negative and positive impacts. Measures for minimizing and offsetting adverse impacts as identified. Irreversible and irretrievable nature of impact should be mentioned specially, that this is the permanent things which and the green belt development plan should be discussed. So quantification wherever possible of impacts should be done. Say in case of air quality, you can say that these will be the changes in the ground level concentration of various parameters. In the ecology, you can say that this will be the indices. So from that you can understand what will be the how much is the impact. Like that, impact is change in baseline condition is impact. So that has to be kept in mind. So sometimes it is qualitative, sometimes it can be done quantitative. So wherever possible, quantitative attempt should be made. Then the notification wants that a discussion should be done of the alternatives, both in terms of technology and site. So discussions on alternatives is about the technology adopted and the site. The site thing is not applicable for expansion projects or mining projects, but technology should be discussed in all cases. Describe each alternatives, summary of adverse impacts for each alternatives, mitigation measures proposed for each alternatives, and then why a particular alternative has been selected with justification. Now the notification gives very clearly these are the requirements, but very few reports, EIA reports in our country actually do justice to this area. This is a thing which needs to be strengthened. The technology is important because supposing you are putting up a distillery. Now, expansion, supposing many a times it is said that it's an expansion project and so no discussion on site or technology. Site can be understood because it is expansion, it will be in the same place. But technology, it should be discussed that it has come after 5-10 years. So what improvements in technology has come about, whether you have adopted the best available technology, that needs to be discussed. If it's not discussed, that's a shortcoming in the EIA. And the ESC does point out that you have not captured this. So our consultant should be very careful on this, and the technology part should be discussed. Even for mining, various methodology, new machines are coming, new way of mining is taking place, whether it is, open cast mines or whether underground mines. So that must be discussed to give a confidence to the reader that yes, this aspect has been seen, and to the extent possible, the latest and the best available technology has been adopted. Environmental monitoring plan, how it will be monitored, details of monitoring program suggested to ensure the effectiveness of the mitigation measures proposed. After they're implemented, whether it is meeting the requirements. So measurement methodologies of various components should be there, monitoring locations, where it should be monitored, what parameters should be monitored, what should be the frequency of monitoring, what kind of data analysis will be done, and reporting schedule of monitoring data, detailed budget, both capital and operating, and procurement schedule of if it's necessary to procure certain equipment and instrumentation. So all these aspects should be there in this chapter number 6, so that the monitoring is done of post EC, post environmental clearance, and post implementation of the project. It's a very weak area in our country, in fact. Additional studies, sometimes in very specific EIAs, you require some additional studies to be done. The first thing here, it will be the public consultation. What notice was given, who was the presiding officer, what issues were raised, what commitments were made, what time frame committed, what responsibility and budgetary provisions are there. So all this should come in this year, chapter. This public consultation part, everything should be there in this chapter. Then comes additional studies, supposing it's on the risk side, it is said that, a HIRA should be done, hazard identification risk assessment, or an on-site emergency plan, or a QRA, quantitative risk assessment if asked for. So all these should be, if asked for, should constitute these additional studies. Social need assessment and SIA, social impact assessment, which is a much larger study. If it is asked for in the TOR stage, it should be done and come in this. Normally what can be done is, these are very big studies, rehabilitation, resettlement plans, if, there are project affected people. Now, what can be done is that, supposing a hydrological study or biodiversity study has been done. So that study can be given in a separate volume, and the, summary of that study can be in the body of the EIA, and refer, the details are given in this, volume number such and such, so that the EIA report, it should, no EIA report in fact should be more than about 150 to 200 pages. And then the balance can be there in different volumes. I know that sometimes various EACs and others, they insist on, real thick EIAs. But I think over a period of time that has been understood. And if it is a EIA is a reasonable, volume, people go through it, and then, it is understood. If somebody wants to know the details about the biodiversity study, then he can go through the biodiversity study, which may run into 500 pages. But the EIA may contain the crux of that biodiversity report in its body. So that is what is expected. Then project benefits. So what are the improvements in physical infrastructure, social infrastructure? Then what corporate environmental responsibility is being committed? Activities proposed, including those emerging from public hearing or social need assessment. This is very important to understand what is the exact need of this people there, and then, develop the program. What is the time frame and budget? No program with time frame, budget, and responsibility carries any meaning unless and until it is having a budget and a time frame and a responsibility. It's meaningless. Then it's just, some text which does not have any much impact. Employment potential, as we discussed earlier also, direct, indirect, skilled, semi-skilled, unskilled, that should be told. And if there are any other tangible benefits, that should also be included in this chapter. Then environmental cost benefit analysis. This is only required if recommended in the scoping stage. Very few projects are being told, because there are not enough data available in our country to do such proper environmental cost benefit analysis. Supposing a hydro project is coming, a lot of area is getting inundated. What is the value of that inundation? The biodiversity which is getting inundated, how do you value it? Okay, it will get more power from the power house, or it will get more irrigation water and more crop will be produced. That's all right. That can be probably to some extent valued. But what happens to that biodiversity which is getting inundated and probably lost forever? So if recommended in the scoping stage, this should be done. Very specialized area of knowledge. EIA coordinators per se may not have this, EIA consultants per se may not have this knowledge. They may have to, opt from outside. Then environment management plan within the organization, administrative aspect of ensuring that mitigation measures are properly implemented and operated to bring the intended results after approval of the EIA. Organizational structure and reporting methodology of the environment division or cell, environment management division or cell of the organization. Mechanism of reporting, non-compliances, and implementing corrective and preventive actions thereof. So this is the administrative aspect of this thing. So a summary and conclusion should be prepared as chapter 11, which should include these things. Basically, project description, crux of the main project, baseline scenario, anticipated impacts, mitigation, environmental monitoring program, additional studies, project benefits, environment management plan, that administrative aspect, and overall justification for implementation of the project. Now this should be there, and the same can be used as an executive summary also, where public consultation is required. Now the summary and conclusion is an integral part of the EIA, whereas an executive summary is required in mostly most EIA reports in our country are prepared in English. So an executive summary is required in the English and the vernacular language, the local language. So that can be taken from the summary and conclusion if the summary conclusion is prepared as per this guidelines. Then disclosure of the consultant should be there last. Name of the accredited consultant, and what kind of consultancy, and a brief resume of the company, details of accreditation, number, date, validity, etc. And details of the coordinator and FAs involved in preparation of the EIA with signed declaration of their inputs in the EIA. So I think these are the 12 chapters as per our EIA notification in our country that an EIA report should include. I think that's all. I've tried to compress this very big topic of how do we prepare an EIA in about hour or hour 20 minutes. So sorry if I have not been able to do justice to some of the aspects. People have some doubts and queries, they can send it to CSE and we would try and get back to you. Thank you very much and namaskar.